In over 3 decades, I've learned that truly great car dealerships are only great because of one thing: leadership. So I'm sitting down with the great men and women inspiring automotive on Tim Talks.
Automotive leadership and beyond.
Welcome, everyone, to yet another new episode of Tim Talks. Today, we are going to be discussing a problem that we all need to address. And CarNow is actively addressing these issues. There are several things, obviously, our industry, with what's happening, making sure that we're completely compliant with GLBA, with TCPA, and so many other things. There are things out there, there are lawsuits out there that we wanted to make you aware of to protect the automotive space that has been so good to us. So I have as guests today people, as often are, people much smarter than I am. So congrats to everyone for listening. You get the smart people today. But I have my friend Nicole Newman, who is a privacy attorney from L2 Partners and BD Emerson. We also have the incredible Josh Talcovitz of Kurkin, Forehand, and Brandeis, and or Forehand, excuse me. I said, see, I told you I was going to mess up. I said Forehand. We're going to have fun today, and Brandeis. And listen, guys, I wanted to present the problem, what's happening in our dealerships across the country, to equip you to be able to handle that. So, Nicole, let me just start with you. CarNow is actively addressing these in several of our dealerships, but let's talk about the Florida Security and Communication Act. Let's start there in what we're doing to provide help for our dealers and what they should be made aware of.
Thanks, Tim. As you know, I've worked with CarNow for a number of years now in their privacy program. As a privacy attorney, I'll be honest, these laws were not on the radar because they're so old. So I'll defer to Josh on talking about the specific laws. But from a privacy standpoint, what we're seeing are these multiple small number suits coming from several litigants, plaintiffs, that are claiming proper consent was not obtained prior to an individual entering into a chat online at a dealership. So it's very concerning because it's taking up time that could be spent better on the business, and because there isn't certainty as to whether there's actually an issue here or not. Nonetheless, CarNow is taking steps to help its dealership clients to deal with these and appropriately address them.
And the thing that boggles my mind, this is an 80-year-old law.
Yes.
That was put on the books. Ladies and gentlemen, lean in here. It was put on the books during World War II for German and Japanese spies and being able to, I just made that part up, but I think it's true. Like during World War II, obviously there was no chat and no digital communication, but this is that old of a law and people are finding loopholes and then attacking dealerships. Is that a correct assessment?
That's absolutely accurate, Tim. And the thing to keep in mind, too, is that not every state has this law. There are certain states that have one-party consent for tapping or recording conversations over wires, meaning telephone wires. This was 80 years ago when we weren't thinking about the internet and weren't thinking about chats on websites. So 80 years ago, there's about 11 states that have two-party consent. And that two-party consent means both parties to the conversation have to say, yes, I'm okay with this being recorded. That's why if you call a company and you're talking on their telephone line, you may get that question that says, are you okay with this being recorded? Or, so you know this is recording by continuing, you're accepting the fact that this is going to be recorded. So very outdated law being applied to a very new type of technology, which is really, it's dumbfounding, or it's even leading to a bit of uncertainty at the court level too, because some of the courts haven't come out with very clear decisions, or those courts in California that have addressed this have not come out with clear decisions on whether it actually applies or not. And that's why we're seeing so many of these suits.
In California, I believe they call it the California Invasion of Privacy
Yes.
Act. Listen, I just want to chat and see if I can get my oil changed, but that is an invasion of privacy. Josh, can you go a little deeper into the pool? Thank you, Nicole, as we unpack this of kind of the who, what, where, and why. Obviously, who's doing this, what's going on, and hope to protect our dealers. Because I guarantee you, most dealers listening, most people listening are like, wait a minute, it's an 80-year-old wiretap. I'm not wiretapping anything. So kind of the who, what, where, and why of what's happening now.
Sure. And Tim, thank you as well to having me on here today. I do appreciate that. So Florida's law, just a little point of clarity, not quite as old as the one in California, as I understand it, but we're still talking about the 1960s.
Yeah.
When this was put in place, about 55 years ago, before the internet was ever even thought in our minds, especially as car dealers. But I think what's most important here is to look at, before we can get to the who, what, where, and why, is the why of why this law was put into effect and how there's any interplay to what we're dealing with now, right? So as you guys know, and as your listeners who may have been affected by this or may end up being affected by this stuff, the what for this is, what are people being sued for under this Florida Security of Communications Act? And it's the chat feature on our dealer websites. Almost all of our dealers have them, if not all of them. CarNow is a major player in that field, and obviously why you guys are actively taking steps to address what has been going on. But we're dealing with a situation where a customer, as you alluded to before, may come on and say, I want a little info about my oil change, a little info about this, maybe a Mazda that I saw for sale on your website. Can I get that? They type some information into a little chat box, and someone chats with them, whether it's AI generated or an actual person. I think there's a little bit of interplay between the two of those. And now we're seeing lawsuits stemming from that. And that's the who. There are people that call themselves digital privacy advocates. And really what they are, in my opinion, Tim and Nicole, they're litigious individuals looking for a way to make a buck. And what they're doing is they're actively seeking out websites of automotive dealers. And it doesn't matter what factory you're looking at, from Kia to Hyundai to BMW and Porsche. We've seen all of it so far. And it's the same individuals and the same attorneys, at least in Florida, that we've seen do this. So what I can tell you, the who, digital privacy advocates, or as I like to call them, people looking to make a buck.
Yeah.
And their attorneys also probably just looking to make a buck. And we're seeing at least a dozen of these throughout Broward and Palm Beach County in Florida. I suspect there are probably a few more in the proverbial pipeline. Now, the what? I think I sort of addressed that. The what is, what are they suing for? Well, they're essentially saying that when I go onto your website, dealer, and I type in some information, and you intercept, that's the word they use, intercept and record that information, you're committing a wiretap. And I have the right to bring a private civil suit against you under this 55-year-old law. Now, everybody's initial reaction is, how is that possible, right? This law was put on the books in order to stop wiretapping for organized crime, which was a rampant issue in the late 1960s, early 1970s. No one was thinking about the internet or what this is about. But, a crafty lawyer, perhaps a crafty litigant, and this is now what we're dealing with. And as Nicole alluded to, we're not the only state dealing with this. California, I suspect some of the other two-party consent states, which frankly, I just don't know off the top of my head other than Florida, but maybe Massachusetts, I believe, is a two-party consent state, so I'll likely see some there as well. That gets me to the where. Right now, I offer for Nicole to jump in here if she's seen otherwise. I've seen California and I've seen Florida, and they seem to be located only in the two counties I mentioned before, that being Broward and Palm Beach. Now, keep in mind, that doesn't mean that a dealership elsewhere, for instance, some dealerships in Miami, clients of mine have already faced lawsuits in this. They just happen to be filed in Broward County, rightfully or wrongfully under Florida's venue statute. Separate issue from what we're talking about today. Now, the when. Well, this seems to have all started in about May of 2024, this past year. We saw a slew of these filed by the same individual and the same attorneys, starting in Broward County, and then a second individual chimed in with the same attorneys, filing in both Broward and Palm Beach County. I think altogether, Nicole may have the exact number. I want to say there's about 16 of these for car dealers. Now, the two individuals that have been filing these, one of them did file against some other entities, not car dealers, but we've all seen these chat boxes. They're not solely for car dealerships to use. A lot of them we see on other websites. For example, I don't know that this is one of the entities that's faced suit. Home Depot, I believe, has it if you go on their website, or Lowe's, or one of those home improvement stores. And they're targeting those sort of things and saying, you wiretapped me. Seems to have been started, like I said, in May. It's unclear from what's been filed so far and what we know, whether that goes back as far as last year or the year before. They don't really say when they access the websites. They just say, in the past, I accessed the websites. It's an issue likely in and of itself. And one that, unfortunately, because of the court process here in Florida and how these are being filed, we might not know until there's actually a trial on this matter. And, that leads me to the how. First part of the how. I think there's really two parts. The how is, how are these being handled on the litigant side, and how can these be handled on the dealer side? My side, I represent almost exclusively auto dealers, franchised and independent dealers throughout Florida and a few up in the Northeast. And you want to know how can I deal with this? Well, the how on the litigant side is they're filing these in small claims court. And there's a really specific reason for this, right? There's generally no discovery in Florida in small claims court, no motion practice, no rules of civil procedure. There's an extremely limited time frame from filing a lawsuit to trial. Usually something in the 4 or 5 months is a big stretch. Whereas if you file in our general civil courts, whether it's circuit court or county court here, you're looking at years likely before you go to trial. Lots of discovery, lots of time and effort invested on the litigant end. Most importantly, I think they're doing this from an economic point of view. There's a very limited economic investment by the litigant on the plaintiff side or their lawyer, because they can copy and paste 24 of these same lawsuits, pay a filing fee, see what happens. But on the dealer side, these are not lawsuits we see every day, especially in this context. There's time and investment from the dealers to deal with this. Their attorneys, myself, people that work in my office, my counterparts in other offices, to learn about these laws, determine how to go about defending these laws. And ultimately, if you have to try the case, that's time and money invested on the dealer end, which these fellas that file these try to do in a way where, hey, dealer, you're better off settling this than you are fighting it, even if you're right. And, it's an unfortunate situation, an unfortunate reality of the practice of law. It just is. Now, the how. How can I deal with this? You can make sure, and I think CarNow's already put this in place for many of their vendors, if their dealerships, if not all, that there's proper consent obtained from the person going into the chat before they start that chat. And I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting the way that it was done before was unlawful or lawful one way or the other. These laws, as far as I'm concerned, are not on the books to address this. This chat box situation does not apply to this, in my opinion. But I am not a judge, and I am not a jury, and I'm not the one making that determination. So how can we avoid it? It's make sure we get consent. CarNow has been proactive in doing that, as far as I understand, and making sure that's there. Number 2 is having a good privacy policy in place on your websites. Make sure that any user of your website has an unavoidable way to see your privacy policy, whether that's through a pop-up or a cookie banner that they have to see in order to continue on your website. I believe CarNow and some other vendors have put those in place to make sure that this sort of situation if not stopped from happening, is at least limited in a capacity. And then the how, I think some of these dealers have to take a stand here because we don't know where this ends. My opinion is if we fight one of these and we prevail before a judge on one of these, the rest may fall, because right now there's no judge that has addressed in Florida these specific set of facts on this specific 55-year-old law and has made a determination as to whether there's even a legal claim to be had. My gut is that the judge will make the right call and find that these have no merit, and there just needs to be one dealer to stand up and do that. We're in the early stages. I have some that want to fight it. I believe we're going to do that with many, and many don't want to be bothered, and they just figure, I'll settle this and I'll move on. I don't think that fixes the problem, but that's the economic reality of how these are being filed. So,
I'm not, obviously that's why I have you guys on, but, I can understand that thought process, but all we're doing is, if we're settling with these people, we're fueling the fire. Because these, I think, Nicole, you called them nuisance lawsuits, right? I mean, these are, and then once they, I don't want to misspeak, but maybe you can speak on that. Once they get, whether it's $5,000 here, 10, whatever the number is, if it's small claims court, it can't be too big. They get excited and they go off to the next one. It sounds like they're throwing as many of these to the wall as possible. And one thing I would add, when, as you were sitting there thinking, I'm like, this technically is not even, it could be more than chat. So digital retailing tools, there's lots of tools on your website that you communicate with, that windows open up, whether that's, trade-in tools, whether that's digital retailing tools, calculators, all vendors, all these things are subject to, if you're not putting at least a disclaimer, now we did provide our dealers with options on how we display that. And Nicole, you can speak to that, and then I'll add some color on what we're proactively doing. But guys, this is just one thing that we absolutely have to have on our radar, unfortunately, because it's the world we live on, but hopefully going to give you a step-by-step process on how to eliminate it here. Nicole, thoughts on what we did and the options that they have? Obviously, everybody doesn't have car now, but what they can ask their providers to do for them. I think
Sam,
you're on
really
mute.
good point that you made is you said kind of throwing it out there to see if it sticks. It's kind of like the spaghetti, throwing it against the wall. And I think that's a really good analogy. And what we're seeing is that this is a cut and paste. And in California, some of our colleagues, some lawyers that I have worked with, when I brought this up with relation to CarNow, mentioned that in California, they were using AI, and there was a plaintiff's bar meeting in Las Vegas where afterwards a lot of lawyers were sort of sending out these mass suits after that. So this seems to be a bit of a copycat. If I may quickly just touch upon what Josh had mentioned earlier about the states that are two-party states. Sure. I think that would be helpful for people to know. It's Florida, Georgia, Connecticut, California, Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Montana, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Puerto Rico, and Washington. And yes, I did have to write that down because I'm not remembering that.
That's pretty good.
So, and there's different different dates of the laws and everything, but, depending on your state, you'd have to look at it. But I think that the best thing a dealership can do is, one, talk to a firm like Josh's at KFB, where they're actually taking a look at these collectively so that we're not settling them and encouraging it to happen again. Just like that person who calls up your grandmother and says you're traveling in Europe, or sends an email, you're traveling in Europe to, send me money. These are akin to those, that approach in many ways. They're a way to get money, as Josh said. Furthermore, it's a really good opportunity for these dealerships to look at their compliance practices in general. I talked with a dealership yesterday that did receive a suit, and I was able to suggest to them some ways to put in place a cookie banner that would at least be a first defense to this. We don't know what the law is going to require, or if it even requires anything with regards to these chats, but we can take protective measures and preventive measures. That means making sure you have a well drawn up privacy policy that checks the box for the laws, the privacy laws where you live. And that will be state dependent because there are new states coming out with laws every day. Rhode Island just came out with one yesterday. Texas enacted one a few weeks ago. So in addition to that, make sure your privacy policy is prominent and best practice, especially if you're in a two-party consent state. Make sure that the individual is actually affirmatively consenting to that privacy policy. Have your terms of use available. A cookie banner used to be 2 years ago not a requirement in the United States, but now it has become common practice and is recommended because it's required in many states. These are some of the things that CarNow has already implemented. If you're in a state that's a two-party state, you will notice as a CarNow customer that the default is that affirmative consent if in a chat bot, in the chat panel. And that's because we're trying to protect customers from these suits so that down the road, there aren't more in different states by these litigants who are, like Josh said, trying to make a buck.
So question. So if I'm listening to this in my car and it's 11 years ago and I'm, managing a sales desk at a dealership, I'm thinking, hey, so maybe can I just call my web provider and have them, make sure that my cookie policy, because even on your phone, everywhere you go, you hit accept all and you move on, right? So is it something that they can put their cookie policy just as a banner and that without something popping up within a messaging window, would that take care of it? Or do they need to do both?
We don't know.
I guess it's up to them entirely, but what is your thought process there?
Unfortunately, we don't know because we haven't seen how the courts are going to rule on this, and it's not a law that applies here. So the least you should do is have a cookie banner that pops up your privacy policy and is compliant with your applicable state laws. In addition to the cookie banner popping up, it should, and everyone's seen those, they're the annoying banners that pop up at the bottom of your screen. And we all click accept all, even me, and I'm a privacy attorney. Half the time I click accept all. It's going to have your privacy policy and hopefully your terms of use as well show up. In addition to that, what you would want to do as a best practice in a two-party state at least, if not in every state, is have the privacy policy actually come up in the chat panel. Now, you may be concerned about is that going to deter a customer from actually proceeding within that chat? I don't think it's going to. And that's I just don't. But, but I'm sure you might disagree.
Yeah, I think that, I know how I shop. I just want my information. So it pops up and I'll just, move on. So I think the majority of the public will, we can have a completely different debate about, when there's a lot of data around when you click on, my best e-price, or whatever it is, trade in or pre-qualify or whatever the call to action is on the website, and you put a form fill for them to fill things out. That's when they abandon it in great numbers. But I do believe, accept all and move on. I think it should be fine.
Can I throw that question back at you, Tim? How many privacy policies in terms of use have you read when you download an app on your phone?
Never.
Exactly. I'd love to think, because I draft these, that people read them all the time, but I'm very practical as an attorney. They are meant as a legal document, and 99% of people are not clicking them. Maybe this will make more people click them. Regardless, it is a legally binding document, and the dealership should be paying attention to what's in there to protect themselves.
That's amazing. We have packed a lot in 20 so minutes or so. Josh, any final thoughts? I'm going to give you an opportunity to talk, and then Nicole, and then we're going to kind of put a bow on this thing and land the plane so people can get back to work and get up through their day. But so much information here. Please, guys, this is the world we live in. Please be careful. Josh, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's this. If we're inviting lawsuits over a chat feature on our website, what is next? How is that any different than the dozens or hundreds of times a day that we're sending and intercepting, as that term's used by these people, by these attorneys and these litigants, communications? How is it any different than me sending an email and that email being stored on my web server? How is it any different than me sending a text message to Nicole asking her how her day was and that being stored on her phone? Where does this end? And if we don't get the judiciary to put a stop to this through an affirmative order saying that there is no claim here, my fear is that these are going to be runaway lawsuits. The flip side to that, though, Tim, is if they succeed on one of these, what does that mean for the industry? And I think that's why a lot of dealers may determine to settle this, because the fear, and everyone's fear in our space, you said it earlier about TCPA compliance and all of that, are these class action lawsuits. If they succeed on one of these in small claims court, my guess is it's a test suit. And if they succeed, we're going to see these filed in our circuit courts here, which is our court of general jurisdiction, for amounts over $50,000. And I suspect class action is the next step here. So my final thoughts are this. I do believe the dealers, and I've talked to many of my clients about this, the cost of fighting this might seem like a lot up front, but the peace of mind it would give you if we're successful has to mean something and has to be worth it. And I know I speak for many of my dealers that we appreciate CarNow stepping up to the plate to work with us on these. And my hope is, Tim, that I don't have to come back on this podcast about the other side of the coin. What's the fallout from these? And what are we doing? And oh my God, now there's class action lawsuits. My hope is that our listeners, your listeners and my dealers will listen to this. We'll put some steps in place. One of them will step up to fight this, and maybe we can put it to an end.
Amen. Very, very well said. Nicole, thank you, Josh.
Yeah, Josh, I couldn't agree with you more on all of that. And I'm glad you joined for this. And I would reiterate what you said, that a collective approach or a defensive approach rather than an acquiescence is key. Paying a little bit of money in the short term might seem like the better solution, but in the long term, it's just going to encourage the behavior. And both for CarNow or whoever you're using for your web design, your web platform, as well as your chat panel, all dealerships should take this as an opportunity to look at their privacy posture, as I call it, and do a checkup. I know that if you reach out to your CarNow representatives, your account managers, they will help you decide whether you should turn on the new features that are maybe optional if you're not a two-party state. And that may be a good protective measure. They can direct you towards how to get a cookie banner in place if you don't already have one. They're really, I've been very impressed with the company wanting to deal with this to make things better rather than just address this singular issue.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you, Josh. And I had to push that button. I haven't helped
yourself, could you, Tim?
Because everyone gets so excited about lawyers.
Yes. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking a few minutes out of your day. Listen, we are all in this together. And we're in a business that's ever changing, and there's lawsuits that pop up here and lawsuits that pop up there. We have to protect ourselves, and we have to be on the forefront. So if that takes a little time to make sure that you protect yourself, Deris Hayes at Hennessy always used to say, make sure you put your foot on a rock. So make sure you put your foot on a rock and you're covered. If you have any questions, we are going to give you Josh and Nicole's email right below. You can always reach out to me at tim@carnow.com and ask us any questions, whether you're a CarNow client or not. Doesn't matter. We are in this together with all 16,500 or so franchise stores and independents and the tens of thousands as well. We are here to serve you. Josh and Nicole, thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for stopping in for another episode of Tim Talks, and we will see you soon. And again, I always say, no one is smarter than everyone. Let's continue to get better together. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.